we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dennis Young. I'm President and CEO of Bittner Architects. I'm going to serve as the moderator for the program. Many of us have heard districts say, it won't happen in my community. They'll also say it won't happen in my school district. And everyone says, we don't really have the money to do what we need to do from a school and safety standpoint, but it's on the list. We're going to get to it. Well, sometimes it's too late to get to it. But if you plan a school from the beginning, what we're going to do is share with you some of the features that you can learn and take away with and implement at your district. So this is not the first time you've heard about school safety and security. I'm sure you've been in many seminars. But this one's a little unique in that we're going to focus on the early learner. So learning objectives, what we want you to come away with, are three things. First one is the approach. When you're looking at a facility like this with early learners, how do you approach the topic? The second is we're going to share a variety of features and products that you can take back and implement at your school. And the third is, what we're doing today is state of the art, but what's the future look like? What's it going to look like for 10 years from now? So I think we have some ideas and we'll share with you, and we really want you to take some of these things back. So let me start from my right and let the speakers introduce themselves and kind of where their perspective, what they're coming from.
I'm Rick Johnston. I'm the recently retired superintendent at Mahomet Seymour School District, and staying on as the project manager overseeing the final product of the bill here that you're about to see.
I'm Sarah Bochek. I'm the Associate Director / General Counsel for the Illinois Association of School Administrators.
I'm Lindsay Hall. I'm the current superintendent of Mahomet Seymour Schools, started on July 1st this year.
And I'm Todd Powers. I'm an architect with Bittner, and in my 25 years, I've spent most of it focusing on educational architecture and design with a particular emphasis in this topic of early childhood.
So let me start with the first slide. The question is really why? Why do you address schools with school safety and security in mind? Well, Sarah has had an interesting position in that she's able to travel around the state, has been in a whole variety of schools, and she was able to visit this school in phase 1. Phase 2, it's under construction right now. And I thought I'd let you share some thoughts, what's going on statewide.
Thank you. This has actually been near and dear, this project has been more near and dear to my heart than most would think. That people probably would have no idea or why this project would be something that I take great interest in. And so the first is, not only do I represent superintendents statewide, I'm their legal counsel. So I love to be in the field. I love to go and see the projects that superintendents are working on. I like to see what their day-to-day looks like. That's part of my regular job. But what many people don't know is I grew up about 20 miles down the road in Gibson City. So any kind of rural projects, any kind of K2, I am a mom of 10, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old. Any of these projects are of great interest. So in passing one day, Rick had said to me, the previous superintendent had said, have you seen our new building? And I'm like, no, I haven't. I'd love to see it. Next time I'm coming through, I'd like to stop by. Well, that started like a journey for me because I stopped by and I couldn't imagine how amazing this was. I got to not only get down in the nitty-gritty with the K2 kiddos, I got to see their learning environment. But what struck me, especially growing up where we grow up, is we're sort of in what's called Tornado Alley. So at any given point, we lived that. So for some of you who may be up here, for some of you down south, some of you will understand this, some of you will not. And you have different safety issues, but growing up in that type of atmosphere, you knew at any given moment what you had to do, where you had to go, and that it wasn't a joke or anything like that. And so what drew me to this was that Rick gave me a tour through, and as we were coming out of one of the primary grade classrooms into their locker area, he's like, I bet you don't know why this is designed this way. I was like, no, this is really cool. Like, it's colorful, and there's lockers, and it's where their stuff is, and that there's seating for them. And he's like, at any given moment, we can shut these doors, lock them in, and it is concrete jungle. So if there is an active shooter in there, and this is their home spot, this is what's, you know what I mean? They would not think, they would not be scared in here. They have their lockers, they have their buddies, they have a place to sit. And if there is a tornado, this is built to withstand any kind of, any kind of force would come with that. If there was an active shooter, they would know, like, this is not a scary environment. So, like, not to, like, get sentimental, but as a mom, you worry about that. As a police officer's wife, who happens to have a very anxiety-ridden daughter, who has to be notified before an active shooter drill, because she can't, you know what I mean, she can't comprehend that, is that kind of peace of mind. And that kind of started my next quest of, like, telling everybody I could about it. And so I think Rick probably saw an uptick of people wanting to see it, because I was like, you'll never guess, you gotta see this place, and this is so awesome, in their virtual learning environment in that building. So that's kind of what got me on this path and got me on this panel. And now I've enjoyed actually speaking about safety from not only a legal aspect, but also from the aspect of being a mom. So super proud of the work at Muhammad, and super proud of my home region, of what they're doing for what's best for kids.
So with that as an intro, let's take a tour. We have about 35 slides and a lot to share with you. And I guess, Rick, I'd like for you, if you can, I'm going to the next slide, kind of talk everybody through the organization of phase one and ultimately what it's going to become as a total school.
Well, first of all, I drew the short straw following Sarah there. Very emotional plea there. That was very good. I think my task would be to give you a little bit of perspective. I don't think that Muhammad is that different than most average school districts in the state of Illinois when it comes to this topic of school security. And so when you talk about approach, to give you a little perspective in some of the board members here, when we began working together back in 2012, we had an environment where we looked at a master plan. 6 months in, we had a master plan of about 7 or 8, 9 different areas that we wanted to really focus in on over the next 5 years. One of those was school safety. We had an environment where there were no buzzing systems. There were 3 video surveillance cameras that didn't work in the district. We didn't have any of those things. Doors were open. It was a very safe environment to those people in the community. The community enjoyed being able to walk in and out of the building whenever they wanted to. So we had to work through that process to get to today's world, and it went pretty well. But I say that because that focus on school security transcended into school design. And so taking that and looking at where we were in this building, and you can see this is the conception of the picture that you just saw. And when we got together in 2012, the long-range plan for the 77 acres of ground that the district owned was to put an extension, that white area on the top picture there would be what was perceived at the time to be a daisy chain effect of adding 2 more grade levels, a K through 2, onto this building. And so really the only shared space would have been the cafeteria space at all. It'd be essentially 2 different buildings. So in the middle of this conversation, we kept talking about, what does surveillance look like? What does, and it's just different between high school. High school, you want to do surveillance cameras, which we have over 130 now. We want to look at a lot of surveillance in hallways because it's checking behavior. Whereas an early childhood center, you want it to be the shell of the building that you're trying to protect. That's just one component. The buzzing systems, the safe rooms and safe places for these young kids. So that conversation morphed into maybe what we need to do. We had an existing downtown grades 1 through 2 center that was adjacent to some of the highest traffic counts in the community. And it had a gas station that had a lot of traffic there. Our kids, when they would go out on the playground, they're exposed to those things. So line of sight issues, who's around us, those kind of things. It morphed into, well, what if we took that footprint instead of daisy chaining and then enclosed the courtyard? Those of you that have been around Champaign know the wind blows all the time. I know it's going to be 30-mile-an-hour wind tomorrow, but it blows all the time down on the plains. And so for a lot of reasons, that enclosed area, the enclosed courtyard, became a focus for our design moving forward, which turned into the site plan that you see, and we're under construction right now. So we've got a lot of the bones of the building in place right now as we move forward. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to just kind of continue with kind of this train of thought. But let's take a look from an educator's perspective. I know Dr. Hall is now the superintendent, is responsible for implementing 2 school cultures, 2 staffs into that school, and you might share some insights.
Okay, thank you. Well, to pick up where Rick left off, we're now in phase 2 of the construction and adding on the part of the building that Rick referenced, and that means that at the start of the next school year, in the fall of 2018, our 1st and 2nd graders are going to move out there, and we will be closing down the current 1st and 2nd grade building, which is in the area Rick described, very high traffic count right downtown. And so when we start school next fall in this completed building, then that's when we'll have close to, if not a little bit over, 700 pre-K through 2nd grade students there. So this is what the playground looks like, and the playground is completely enclosed, as Rick referenced, and so it's within a courtyard. So there's no visible line of sight for the public to see our kiddos when they're out playing at recess. And the overall tenor of the playground is one of very, very friendly. There's a soft surface in there, and again, completely enclosed so that there's no viewpoint of the public from being able to see where the kids are playing at recess or anything like that. Another fantastic feature of the school building is the ease of observation. There are windows inside of the school building into different spaces, but there's always also very long lines of sight, so that at any given point at the corners of the building, you really could use a minimum of 4 adults could be able to see pretty much the entire building. Now there's a 2nd story feature that's being built right now. But in terms of those long hallways, lines of sight, lines of observation within the school is not only from a safety standpoint, lots of observation opportunities, but also lots of light, lots of natural light, very bright, welcoming building that's very fun. I'm very happy that my office is in one corner of the building, so just a quick couple of steps out the back door and I get to see our little ones in their learning environments. This is a diagram of the safe room that Rick was referencing. So between every 2 classrooms is what we call a cubby or a safe room. It's kind of the gray area in between there. And there's some practical purposes with that. There are lockers in there for all of the kids' belongings when they come in. And so it takes all of that clutter out of the hallways and out of the classrooms. So practical purpose there, and this is what that looks like in there. But then, again, as we talked about, this is also a safe area in terms of storms, tornadoes, but also in terms of if there would be an intruder or active shooter. And so these are accessible from a door that goes into the back of the classroom. So classrooms have an entrance into the hallway and then also into the cubby. And this particular cubby, that exit door goes out onto the playground as well. So a lot of goals were accomplished with this design, again, in terms of the practicality of having the storage, some organization for our students, but then the safety factor as well in those cubbies.
What's interesting here is that in this building, the cubby halls are not the only safe feature. They are the safe feature for K1 and 2, but actually at the preschool level, the safe room is the restroom. As you can see on the top of that photo, there's a little shared restroom as there is a shared cubby, and in this particular case, we decided to make the restroom that FEMA safe room kind of space. So you can roll that implementation out in any number of ways. Now, what we often like to ask about this is one of their kind of typical classrooms, whether it be pre-K or all the way to 2. We always ask, what's missing? And everybody looks at it and they're kind of staring hard and it looks clean, it looks neat, it looks great. And Dr. Hall touched on it. What's missing is the clutter. One of the side benefits of this particular implementation is that all the baggage, the kids come in, particularly this time of year, they have their coats, their gloves, their hats, their boots, and all that, and their backpacks, and their lunches, and all that, and that stuff ends up pouring out of cubbies, laying on the floor, and you end up losing a viable chunk of teachable square footage you could use productively because of that clutter. Well, the beauty of it is the clutter is out of sight, out of mind. So we really do get multiple benefits out of spaces like this.
Todd, you might talk a little bit about how that space is constructed in terms of the concrete top and the locking of the doors and how all that.
That's actually the key. It's not really any different than many rooms in a building. It happens to be made out of concrete block. It's highly reinforced. But the real difference is the lid. It's a 6-sided concrete box, and the lid is about a foot thick. Most folks think that, you want the building to be able to withstand things falling on it. And that's true, because a lot of times a roof in a school or a building will collapse during a tornado and fall on the building, and it's up to that. But actually, having the roof pulled off is our biggest concern. In most really severe tornadoes, it cleans the ground, and there's nothing left. So we want to make sure this box is heavy enough to stay, and that's really the key here. So I'm going to go ahead and jump forward here.
Can I make a comment about your safe room really quick? And from a parent's standpoint, right, or because remember I'm wearing a couple different hats, right? But from a parent's standpoint, just take a moment, right? Is that you get the call out, you get the text or whatever emergency system that your school uses, and you now know your child's in lockdown, or you now know that a tornado is heading towards, and you now know that you know, what kind of peace do you have knowing that your child's in a colorful, safe environment? And you're always going to want to get there, but for me, the visual of seeing my kindergartner not as scared, because this is a common space for them. This is a common thing. They may not get the full severity of what's going on, but from a parent standpoint, I mean, what you can't see in this is those kiddos can sit on those ledges. Like that is a very friendly, it's colorful, it's almost like a fun area. And so from a mom standpoint, I didn't want that to skip by, is that I don't think you can underestimate when you're in this kind of phase, or your construction, or you're working with your architect, is actually taking off that school board hat or taking off our professional hats and putting on our mom and dad hats. Because we forget to do that sometimes. We forget to actually think, what would this be like from a parent's perspective? Or what would this be like from a 5-year-old's perspective? And I'm telling you, if you can take a trip here, you will feel comfortable in those rooms. You're like, this is so cool. So the picture doesn't do it justice.
I don't know if you've been in a school with 5-year-olds and you're trying to get them down the hallway. They don't even go down the hallway well for lunch, let alone if there's a storm or if there's an intruder and the teacher's frantic and everybody gets excitable. They're not going to make it down to the cafeteria. They're not going to make it down to the gym, at least not all of them. They will all make it into that room. They go in there every day to get their hats and their coats, get their lunch boxes. They're very familiar with it, and when it's time, maybe some of the teachers are beginning to name these rooms, but they go in there very orderly at a time when it's really a lot of chaos. So it's a nice idea to think about. From a construction standpoint, they can build these and actually drop them in place, with the lids on. So it's pretty efficient if they want to build it that way. So Todd, why don't you continue?
Well, it's a perfect segue. What I really wanted to mention here, and Dennis already alluded to it, it's the concept of time. If you talk to your local law enforcement, they're going to suggest to you time is of the essence to them. If you think about some of the products you've seen in life, things like waterproof. This is waterproof. Well, we know most things aren't actually waterproof, are they? They might be water resistant. The reason I say that is we can implement all kinds of strategies in a school building. Nothing is 100%, but everything is designed to give you that one thing that the police need more than anything, more time. So it's really important the younger the kids get. So high school kids, middle school kids, they're in and out of classrooms all day long. They're traveling around the building. They might have a variety of safety and security measures and features and rooms that they can go to. You get down here, though, to the earliest students, and all those transitions are hard. Everything's a production. Okay, we're going to get up now, we're going to go to lunch. Well, first they have to get up, they probably need to wash their hands, they need to get in line, they need to go down the hall. Everything takes time. We don't have time. In an emergency, that's the one thing we absolutely don't have much of. So that's the reason we implemented some of these strategies.
Well, and one of these, I know we're hitting the cubby hard. Another example is the window reinforcement. So whether it's a film that you may use, whether it's a harder shell window that you're putting in place, when he says there's a lot of different things, it's not just the cubby design. There are a lot of things that have gone into that.
Right. So here's an example of, this is the Muhammad School, and if you happen to be in that classroom and you were trying to get everybody organized and get to what they're building now is actually a FEMA community shelter, that's a long road trip. That's probably well over 1,000 feet. So by the time you organize the kids and you march them all the way down that hall, and imagine everybody's going on this trip. So you got hundreds of kids trying to make this road trip. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, and maybe you only have a handful of minutes to get there. Now, one thing that's happened that I want to make you aware of also is that about 2 years ago, give or take, the state of Illinois adopted the 2015 International Building Code, which mandates that all educational buildings must have a storm shelter, a FEMA F5 compliant storm shelter. And if you have over 50 kids in your building, which I'm sure everybody does, it has to be what's called a community shelter. And that means it has to be large enough to handle the entire student and staff population in the building, which generally means it's a big space. It's hard to do it in small spaces. You can do it in a limited rollout, but the other problem is that not only do you have to build the hardened shell, you have to provide ventilation air, you have to provide backup power, and you have to provide water and plumbing. Those things get to be really expensive if you're talking about rolling it out across smaller platforms. So in the case of, and there is one exception to that, and it is for pre-K. I think the exception primarily exists because a lot of people offer pre-K in a very small, maybe a more residential style setting, but nonetheless, I think most districts opt to go ahead and put it in. So you can see this is the community shelter that's going to be at the Middletown Prairie when phase 2 is done. So in compliance with code, we are building a full-size high school size court, gymnasium with bleachers, and you'll see in a moment all the nice bells and whistles, which is fantastic. But that doesn't change the fact that we're still addressing the needs of the younger kids. So this is what the gym will look like when it's built. It doesn't have any windows, as you'll notice, but it's still pretty bright and light and airy. It has the school colors, a wood floor, all the nice things. So it's going to be a great space. But it also has to have bathrooms, as I said. So you have to have restrooms, you have to have air, you have to have power. That gets to be difficult. And Muhammad, obviously being an early learners building, we had the community shelter, but you can see we also have the original storm shelters, storm and intruder shelters. And those little red rectangles and squares are all over the plan. So clearly, everybody in the building at all times has good and clear access to storm shelters. So they're completely rolled out everywhere except basically for some of the older kids, the second graders, some of the first graders. They're pretty close to the community shelter. They do have intruder protection, but they didn't end up with the FEMA box.
Todd, you might emphasize the point of the difference between protection from a storm and protection from an intruder in terms of the number of people you want to put in a room.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, in the event of an intruder, the community shelter is that's not where you want to go, of course. The last thing we want to do is congregate in a large communal space with no windows and no visibility. So you want to have availability of both. Obviously, in the event of a storm, everybody can go to any of those. So the intruder, the small rooms really do handle it well. And as I said, every grade, every student in this building, pre-K through 2, has access to a hardened space adequate to protect them during an intruder event.
So I guess the point we want to emphasize is that the building code will require you to have that community shelter, but does it really work well for this age group?
I think it's important to note too, hopefully you do not study school shootings like unfortunately we have to, but most, if not all of the school shootings in recent history, it's lasted less than 5 minutes. And I don't think people realize that how quickly those kids have to move to a place. So when they talk about the community shelter versus the individuals, like individual things, that's another thing as a parent that puts my mind at ease, is that if they only have 30 seconds to get where they need to get to, at those younger ages where they can't move and they freeze and they don't know what they're doing, think about, no parent wants to think about that, no administrator wants to think about it, no teacher has to think about it, but those things have happened in less than 5 minutes. So think how you can see very quickly why I go all over the state talking about this model, from not only a parent standpoint, but also from, unfortunately, my job, to have to study those things and how we can prevent them.
I think one other thing to add would be, when you look at an intruder wanting to do harm, the older the student, the more you want them engaged in that response. So the shelter in place becomes such a high priority at the lower levels versus what you would do in junior high or high school, because there, whether you use an ALICE response or a run, hide, fight response, whatever it may be, on an intruder at those upper levels, it's just a totally different environment.
I might also add that when we review these preliminary plans with law enforcement, in the old days, you always sat down with the fire marshal and they reviewed the plan. But now it's law enforcement also. And their goals are a little different than ours. Ours is to keep the intruders out. Theirs is to get into the building. So if you can recall the slide that had the small cubby area and a door that led outside, which was a female graded door, that's the door for the police to get into the building as well. As we look at the overall plan, I guess there's a number of other things that we could add that isn't as obvious. The gym, which is the community shelter, is up front where the community can get to it as they travel to the school, and the playground that's secured in the middle. And I might add that, back in, probably before all of our times, back in the 60s, they had designed, well, other than Cheryl, she wasn't volunteering her age. But, we moved away from that playground or courtyard that was in the middle of the school because it disrupted all the rooms around it, because kids are sitting in there hearing laughter outside, and certainly that's more fun than listening to the teacher. But we moved back that way, but differently. The playground's much larger, it's secured, and we can harden the school all we want, but when the kids go out and play outside, we can't protect the average playground. This scheme can, and it's not the same, it's not the solution for everybody, but depending on the location of this school and the amount of site that you have, it's certainly something to consider.
So what's the future hold? Obviously, we're going to continue more of the same. I mean, all these strategies are sound. We're going to continue to roll those forward and evolve. But materials and technology are going to be keys. Some years ago, we would have primarily been dealing with hard materials. What can we do with concrete block, things of that nature. But we're not building prisons. We're building schools. And honestly, if you looked around here at schools you've seen today out on the walls and around the convention hall, most of the things you're seeing are probably just full of glass. The schools we're doing just tend to be more and more full of glass, full of glazing products. Those are clearly a little more of a challenge because it's not that hard to break a window, to break glass. So that's one area of significant advancements. And what we did actually at Muhammad in phase 1, we originally designed the project with laminated glass in limited areas, primarily doors and vestibules, places where people commonly get into a building, they're used to entering. We went ahead and rolled it out basically building wide. All the exterior windows have laminated glass, which is essentially two plies of glass with a film in between. It's kind of like your windshield in your car. It can break, but it won't just fly out, it won't crumble, and you can't just walk in the building. We actually conducted a test some years ago. We asked SWAT officers to test door prototypes. We put glazing systems in various glass and asked them to try and get in the door. And they went up to standard old, safety glass, tempered glass, hit it with their baton. The glass shattered, it crumbled into little bits, and the guy reached in and he opened the door. 3 seconds in. Okay, that's pretty much a failure. How do you call that safety glass? Well, it's safe because you don't get cut by the glass, but it doesn't provide any measure of security. So we added the film inside the glass. He worked on that one for quite a while. It actually would have probably broken the door through before he actually got through the glass, which was great. Again, it took more time, to go back to the theme of time. Now we're actually introducing another layer of, it's called safety film, and it's an applied product. They came out primarily in reaction to hurricanes and potential bomb blasts and things like that, but they also perform equally well in a small-scale intruder protection type scenario. If somebody's trying to beat their way in to your front door or a side window, if you have safety film and laminated glass, you just really added a lot of protection. What's coming in the future, they're already starting to be there, but what's on its way as far as product advancements are ballistic films. Right now, there aren't any films out there that really have any ability to stop a bullet. They can stop an intruder with a blunt object and all that, but if somebody starts to want to shoot the door and try and break the glass, the bullets get through. So now they're starting to upgrade all the way to the point where they're starting to evolve into a bullet-resistant type of film. So that's probably, I would say, the most significant advance, because most of the places that people are going to try and get into the building are through, obviously, clear, glazed areas. Most people don't try and break into the building through the concrete wall. It's obviously a lot harder. As far as technology, well, that's of course anybody's guess. Rick talked about, how much, as far as cameras, surveillance cameras, how much of that we have in the building. It's useful. I've talked to a lot of school districts who've developed different strategies, announcing codes. There isn't any one thing that works. It's kind of a what works best for you methodology. But I would say primarily what you're looking forward to here are significant product advancements.
It shows the lobby, and everyone knows the term welcome center. Does everybody know that term? It's really a secured vestibule. If you're in law enforcement, it's called sally port, and where you walk in a set of doors to get in, and then that locks behind you, and the set of doors in front don't get open until someone hits the switch. That's a sally port. Usually what we're doing is taking these small little vestibules and we're making them quite bigger into a lobby. And you can be contained in that lobby if you got in. But the real problem we run into is a shadowing effect. I'm going to let Bill in, but I didn't see the two guys that just ran in next to Bill. And so that's fine. Bill and those two guys are in the lobby together, but they're not going to get into the school. So you might think about that when you're planning a school. It's a little bit more square feet, but it's really up to you. Normally, they would then be able to have to go through the administrative office to get checked in, have their ID scan to the FBI, and then you're able to get into the school from the administrative area. Ooh, coming kind of fast. You want to talk on the glass at all?
Just in closing, this is an install of that safety film going in. It is and the beauty of this is you can do it now. Safety films have really come down in cost. They've gone up in technology, and there's a lot of qualified folks out there to install them. So if you don't have safety film or you don't have laminated glass, you can add safety film to any glazing in your building. You'll get the net result on that right. It's always going to break, but you're not going to get through. That's the key.
And last year there were significant grant dollars for our schools who wanted to do some upgrades to their safety features. It was specifically for safety. It was a very small window for the grant, but I know a lot of school districts were able, that did not have the funds to be able to grab some of those grant dollars from the state and go ahead and put some of this stuff up on their windows and their access points.
Depending on your funds, your maintenance people can put this film on. What they have to do is wrap that film around the glass so it really holds tight. It can't just be applied on the surface, but to wrap the edges. This is kind of the last slide. This is O'Fallon Township High School, and they had an issue when we designed that building of an adjoining school district where a car ran through the side of a classroom and killed a kid. And that puts your sensitivity pretty high. Then there were some other things that happened in other parts of the country where cars would drive into the front of the building. So we decided to put their initials, OTHS, where that is reinforcing bars with footings. And if you want to try to run your car through that, I'd love to film it because you won't make it through there. And I thought, well, that's a place kids are going to put bubble gum and tape and everything else. It's pride. That looks as good today as it looked back when we took those photos. So trying to protect areas of entry from intruders, from cars, from trying to get your area of circle of security, your zone back from the building. Don't have woods right up next to your building. All that are the things that law enforcement will recommend. So with that, I kind of like this photo. You might want to talk about this. This is not a STEM class, by the way. This is
this is real world learning there. Well, since really this summer and with the start of school, as we're adding on this addition, we do have our littlest students there, our pre-Kers and our kindergartners. And so within the courtyard, we've obviously taken great precaution to keep them away from the construction that's going on. But it's really, really neat to watch what goes on a daily basis, but also watch the wonder and curiosity of the kids as they watch the various pieces of equipment that come in. So that's been a lot of fun. It's certainly been, there's been many, many teachable moments. I've gone into many classrooms and read some stories about construction and construction equipment, which has just been wonderful. But it's been a great project to watch evolve and transform our building. And once we have the first and second graders over there starting next year, it's really just going to be one of the best facilities around. So it's my honor to serve as superintendent in this district, and appreciate that opportunity.
You're probably asking, well, how did that cement truck get inside that courtyard? If you weren't, you need to think about that. We had a crane, but we didn't think that was a very good idea. The real idea is, you have to get EMS, maintenance, fire department, all kinds of things into that courtyard. What we have is a series of overhead garage doors that open where you can drive basically across a connecting hallway. So you can just drive right in and just drive right out. And that's how that truck got in there. So you have to plan for that. Yeah.
I think just to Todd's point, building a school, not a prison, the landscaping that you saw, if you look closely at the front entrance of the gym, you saw landscaping there with large rocks, and the way it was landscaped provides security in and of itself. Those things have just been huge. There's no barbed wire out there, that kind of thing. It's I think our board chose in the first design and then in phase 2, they chose function over flash. So if you walk through the building, the comments that we get post-construction is that, hey, it's simplistic, it's nice, it's neat, but it's not over the top. And I think that is probably what we take the most pride in, is function over flash.
So with that, we'd like to conclude and open it up for any questions. You have everybody up here can answer questions from a technical standpoint, from an educational standpoint, cost estimate standpoint, any of those questions. Does anyone have anything? We were hopeful there'd be no questions. The one thing that led this whole, was one over here?
Yeah, I guess you alluded to it a little bit with the enclosed courtyard playground, that noise is a concern. So have districts that have done this mentioned to you how they manage that? Are there strategies, I guess, because I know that is still going to be a lingering concern.
Okay, the question is the noise in that center courtyard, what are the strategies that the district puts in place to minimize, if not eliminate that? And Rick?
Well, I think we probably even exacerbated that situation because we have windows that are designed for those little kiddos. That they have windows that are inches off the ground that they can see out of that I can't. And so I think it goes back to that whole concept of on task, on time, trying to focus and get kids to be on task. And it's a never-ending battle of where it needs to be. But I think we went the other way and said, you know what?
It's worth the risk.
It's worth that, yeah. And so that inquisitiveness, the idea of being able to absorb your environment and then perform in that environment, I think that's what our staff's really trying to do.
Thank you.
Another point I'd like to just make is all the thought process went into creating a learning environment. Not necessarily safety, but it was all about a learning environment. And that then led us to thinking about the kinds of features that needed to get put in place. And when we put those in place, we thought about they needed to have double duty. They needed to provide storm protection as well as intruder protection. And then to think about how will the kids react to that kind of design feature. And that's how we got to the age-appropriate solution, because they don't move very fast and they have to get there very quickly. You're going to add something?
Just back on the playground, I think Rick or Dennis mentioned generous. How you get around some of that issue with the kids, kind of interfering in the classroom from the playground is it's a generous playground, and most of the core activity is held off of the buildings. There's a lot of green space around the perimeter of this playground. It's a lot of grass. Purposefully, we put all the play equipment kind of out in the middle. So the kids are quite a ways from most of the windows. So while they're out there, they're not up and banging on the glass right against the window. So there is a lot of real estate out there for them to kind of get away.
Okay. Anybody else want to share any last comments up here at the front? We want to respect your time and thank you all for coming. We hope you learned something and you can take it back and then improve upon it. When you get a great idea, please let us know. We'd like to use your idea and advance the idea forward. Thank you so much.